Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Father-Son Packers podcast, your source for Packers news, notes, and analysis. My name is Tommy, and I'm one of your hosts, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my dad, Matt. Dad, how you doing?
Doing all right. We're, going through the draft.
Yep, bit by bit, piece by piece.
Exciting players, I think. So, I think Packers had a good draft overall.
And it's also the time of the year where that cannot be disproven. You can't prove that the Packers did not have a good draft. But yeah, like you said, today we are going to be continuing our series on deep dives into the Packers draft class. Today we are going to be doing Anthony Belton and John Williams. And you might be wondering, why on earth are they doing the 2nd round pick and the 7th round pick? Well, we figured, we can tie both the O-linemen together and then talk a little bit about what it means for the offensive line room in general at the end of the podcast. So stay tuned all the way to the end for our thoughts on what the offensive line room will look like in 2025 and in 2026.
Yeah, don't touch that dial.
A little bit. But yeah, so we are going to be, like I said, continuing our deep dive, and what that means is we already started. So if you want to go check out our deep dive into Matthew Golden, we did that last episode. And then going forward, I think next week we're going to do Baron Sorrell and Colin Oliver. And then going down the list, we'll do Savion Williams, I think, and Micah Robinson together a little bit later. And then we'll do Warren Brinson and some of the UDFAs, I believe, together as well, since it makes sense to do him with Nazir Stackhouse, since they're both, Georgia defensive tackles, and we can talk about them and how they played off each other a little bit. But we reserve the right to change that order. So if we do something different...
So we're putting Savion Williams and Micah Robinson together because they're both running out on pass routes?
Yeah,
offense or defense?
Skill players. But no, they're kind of the odd men's out a little bit in terms of how we want to pair these. But anyway, like we mentioned, today we'll be doing Anthony Belton and John Williams, players I think we're both pretty excited about as, additions to this offensive line room. Before we get into any of that, though, just want to pitch a couple of things. Follow us on Blue Sky, at Father-Son Packer. Like, subscribe, leave a comment on YouTube, Spotify, Apple. Leave a review, tell a friend, et cetera, We'd really appreciate it. Let us know what's good. Let us know what's bad. Leave a comment. We love talking with other Packers fans. Check out on Blue Sky, for updates on content from other Packers content creators. Whenever we drop new episodes, we post out there news related to the Packers, movements, contract signings, et cetera. And also, before we get into that deep dive, just wanted to touch a little bit on some Packers rumors and news that have been floating around. The first is that
tough to call it. Some of it news.
Yeah, more rumors. It's
wild speculation and rumors. Some of it's not even rumors. Some of it's just like wild speculation. Oh, I think this is a good idea.
Yeah, but some of it, I think there's always one of those things where you take it with a grain of salt, but there's also a kernel of truth. One of those things. The first is that there are rumors as
which one's bigger, the grain of salt or the kernel of truth?
I'd say a kernel is bigger than a grain.
Kernel seems like bigger, but
yeah. But anyway, according to 93.7 The Fans, Andrew Filipponi, there are some rumors that the Steelers, after trading George Pickens to the Cowboys, are perhaps interested in acquiring Romeo Doubs. So there's some murmurings there. Dad, any thoughts on that? The Packers do have a bit of a crowded receiver room now. There were issues with, Dobbs, not showing up to practice last year and them having to suspend him for a game. At the same time, though, with Watson missing, set to miss most of this year, and then, 2 other rookies being brought in, Dobbs is probably your second most proven receiver right now. And, moving on from him would certainly be an aggressive move and definitely a vote of confidence in the other guys in that room, but it would definitely be aggressive, right?
It'd be very aggressive because he's probably going to, at least at the beginning of the year, be your number one outside receiver.
So depending on how camp
there'd
goes.
Be some risk unless they've already seen what Golden is like in the offense to trade him away this early in the offseason. I can see why the Steelers need more receivers, and they're probably like, oh, the Packers just drafted 2. Maybe they are willing to trade somebody that Aaron Rodgers knows.
I think that is also part of it is, hey, he played with Rodgers before. And there was something where it was and Rodgers is a fan of Dobbs' game. It was well, didn't seem like it when they were playing together, but okay. But anyway, so that piece of news is out there. I would not be surprised to see some kind of move made in the receiver room, just given the fact that it's really crowded right now. And, Dobbs...
Especially with Dobbs on the final year of his contract.
I was going to say with that, and they don't really seem to have a lot of interest in extending him. There are rumors that he wants the Khalil Shakir deal, which I don't think they're going to give him, and I don't think they probably should give him.
I don't think they can afford to give him.
Yeah, and there were rumors that the DK Metcalf trade rumors were put out there by Romeo Dobbs' camp. That was a rumor at one point. So, there's a lot going around out there right now.
A rumor about a rumor?
Exactly. The other piece of news, which, we seem to get every single episode, new Jair news. Everything is Jair related these days. There's always a mandatory Jair segment on every single Packers podcast, it seems like these days. But we do have...
I think we're fulfilling our requirement to...
Yeah, we're hitting the quota.
To mention Jair.
Exactly. He's got to be mentioned once per podcast at this point. But this was from an article by Jeremy Fowler of ESPN. Quote, the Packers and Alexander are working on a resolution that should materialize soon. A revised contract for Alexander due $17.5 million in cash this year to balance his injury history with his longtime status as an elite corner might be the most sensible play, end quote. So I think that would be kind of the ideal situation is, he's still with the team because he is a valuable member of the team when he is playing. But you restructure that contract and make it maybe a little bit more incentive based, where it's like based on the number of games he's played, he gets, a certain bonus, because that's the only real problem right now is that he just only plays half the games. I think he's played 32 games over the last 4 seasons. So I think that would be the ideal scenario for the Packers. I don't know what has changed from earlier in this offseason when it was put out there by numerous sources that he was not taking a pay cut and that they hadn't even approached him about a pay cut. I don't know what has changed between now and then. But I think that would be what's best for the Packers is if they are able to, get a restructured deal done, right?
Yeah. And I think if he plays 17 games the whole season in the playoffs, I think the Packers would be,
willing to pay whatever,
much,
whatever the bonus is. Yeah. Cause ideally, if he plays that, then he's totally worth the money. It's just the problem.
He's still good when he's on the field.
Yeah, and he's maybe not quite as good as he was in those All-Pro years. He's not the tackler he used to be, but yeah.
Still way above.
Probably good, yeah, the rest of the guys that they have. That's true. Moving on, though, anything else you wanted to touch on with that, either the Dobbs news, the Jair news, or should we start going through our deep dive? Because I think we have a lot to talk about.
From our perspective, it's hard to tell what's rumor, what's knowledge, and what's speculation. It's like, this makes sense. This makes sense versus... I'm hearing something.
And the Fowler one, the fact that he said a resolution should materialize soon kind of makes me think that there actually is some, something tangible to that reporting, not just speculation. I do think the part about, balancing injury history with long-time status, the idea that maybe there's some incentives, that's more speculation, I think, but
it might be the most sensible play is not sound like a statement that something.
Yeah, exactly. That's just speculation, but it does seem like there are actual rumblings of a rework deal being done, which would be good for Green Bay, I think, in the long run and the short run. Moving on, though, to the real core of our episode with these deep dives of these 2 new offensive linemen for Green Bay. Let's start off with newest offensive lineman and second round pick. The Packers with the 54th pick in the second round. They do a little da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. Select offensive tackle Anthony Belton out of NC State. They did announce him as an offensive tackle, although some people think he's more of a guard. 24 years old, born in 2001. Went to junior college for 2 years after being a 0-star recruit out of high school. Played 4 years at NC State, 3 as a starter, with 2,229 snaps at left tackle and 11 snaps at right tackle, with no snaps along the interior. So mostly has been a left tackle only in college, although there is some projection that he can play a little bit of guard. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Did play a little bit of right tackle at the Senior Bowl as well. And, with those 11 snaps at right tackle, a lot of experience there. But Dad, do you want to start? Let's start talking about our initial reactions to the pick. What did you think when you saw this was the selection for Green Bay with Jordy Nelson announcing the pick?
Right. So that's my very first reaction was I was surprised they didn't go for some kind of pass rusher on the edge or in the interior. Like there are a few chances, mainly in the interior, like Omar Norman Lott, Darius Alexander, Shamar Turner, or on the edge, Landon Jackson or Jordan Birch. But for the Belton pick overall, I thought he was a good pick for the Packers in the draft from a pretty early point in the draft season. But I expected that he was going to go like in between their second and third round picks, that they would think it's a little too early to get him in the second, and then he'd be gone by the time they got to the third. As he moved up the board during the season, I was getting him in the third early in the draft process, and then he was gone as the draft got closer and he started rising up the consensus boards that are driving the mock draft machines.
Yeah. And my reaction was I was actually a little bit surprised to see how controversial of a pick this was. Because when this pick was made, I was like, okay, nice. Like, that was my reaction. It wasn't like, doing laps like the Matthew Golden pick. Like, I wasn't I wasn't like super, super ecstatic, but I was like, okay, nice pick. Like, yeah, no, I like Belton there. But it seems like this was actually probably the most controversial pick of any of the Packers picks, at least in the, Packers social media sphere. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that he was a little bit lower on the consensus board. A lot of people had him more as like a third rounder. But for me, watching him at the Senior Bowl, I liked what I saw. We'll talk about that a little bit, but he had some really nice reps against some high level pass rushers there. I think he shows some versatility in terms of being able to play tackle and guard. I don't mind at all, that they're going for, more offensive line depth. I know some people were like, why are you drafting offensive line? I think I totally get it, especially when you look back to that Eagles game and look at the offensive line depth that they had. So I don't mind that at all in terms of the position they went with. He was one of like 2 or 3 linemen that I liked for the Packers on day 2. Ideally you pick him in the 3rd round, but at the same time, offensive linemen had been
be there.
Yeah, exactly. Offensive linemen had been going off the board, and he was probably like the last of 1 or 2 guys, and they were probably not going to make it all the way to their pick in the 3rd round. And so I like the pick. And let's start talking about him more.
Well,
as
I just want to add that I think the consternation over where he was in the consensus board is that the consensus board was just behind the times. It had not caught up with the team's opinions based on how many visits he got. It was like 18 visits.
14 in the end. 14 official
end,
visits
okay,
confirmed with NFL teams. So teams were clearly high on him. And, at the same time, consensus board is a very useful tool, I think. And so we can't just be like, when it doesn't, line up with the Packers picks, we're like, it was behind the times. And when it does, when we're drafting, guys who are higher, it's like, so look, it's a steal. So you can't have it both ways. At the same time, though, it's more of as the Pirates of the Caribbean goes, it's more of a guideline than a rule. But anyway, so yeah, I like the pick. But Dad, let's start talking about him as a prospect, what he brings to the table. And let's start off with the physical profile. Big man, massive man, huge dude. You want to take it away with that one?
Yeah, so he's 6'6", 336 pounds by the time of the combine. I think he was 345 at the Senior Bowl.
And NC State had him listed at 356 pounds. And he also did mention recently when he was at rookie minicamp that he wants to lose 10 pounds by training camp. 10 more pounds. And so I don't know if that's like getting back down to 330 or like he's back up about 340 right now, or he wants to get down to like the 320s because like
that's
it's unclear what
we don't know what he was at.
And so
maybe that's 10 pounds to get back to 336.
Yeah, and so there are maybe some questions about like, okay, like are we gonna have to like be focused on his weight as like something that they need to keep from fluctuating as a team? It didn't sound like the Packers had a whole lot of like concerns about that. That wasn't really mentioned in any of their pressers or anything. But I do remember Dane Brugler on the Athletic Football Show's live stream of the 2nd and 3rd rounds did mention if you can keep him under that, weight, and so maybe something to keep an eye on because he was a lot heavier when he was at NC State, but and that actually kind of, I think, did show up at the Senior Bowl. I thought he moved a lot better at the Senior Bowl than he did while he was at NC State. But Dad, speaking of those movement skills, how is he as a mover?
Yeah, well, so just to finish off some of his size, so he's like 90 percentile height weight as a guard, 90% in the 90s for tackle for weight, and 61% for height. Arm length is long enough, 34 and 5/8 was I think his pro day measurement.
Long enough, yeah.
71 percentile tackle, 90 percentile as guard. 10 and a quarter inch hands, both in the 2/3 to 3/4 percentile, and a big wingspan, 84 and 1/8. 82nd percentile tackle and 96 at guard. His 40 time is okay. But remember he's a big man. 5.26 in the 40, 50 percentile at tackle and 59 percentile at guard. 3.04 20-yard split, 54 percentile at tackle and 60 percentile at guard. And a 1.82 10-yard split, which is a little slowest of his 3 measurements, 32 percentile at tackle and 45 percentile at guard, which considering that's where you expect the biggest change based on mass, is that initial burst out of the blocks.
Yeah, I mean, and he's big, so you're not expecting him to be the fastest guy around. He's maybe a little bit slower than, but like if he was running like a 5 flat, like probably would have been a first rounder. So at the same time, controlling for weight though, I think he's plenty fast enough, and the burst is fine. But you also had some movement stuff from him actually on the field at the Senior Bowl in terms of they have the GPS tracking, the zebra tech stuff, and so how he's actually moving in pads, as opposed to running around in shorts, doing more track workouts. How was he as a mover at the Senior Bowl?
Right. So they keep track of top speed, maximum acceleration, maximum deceleration, also like total distance covered and explosive efforts. So one thing I think I always try to remember in doing this is like somebody might not be sprinting all out in the plays that they're given. But I think it may be most useful for some of the change of speed measurements. But they've been taking these measurements at the Senior Bowl since 2018 and also at the Shrine Bowl since 2022. So I got all the offensive tackles from both of those groups to get an entire set of 128 offensive tackles. So for maximum speed, Belton was in the 59th percentile for maximum on-field speed. And when you adjust for weight, he's in the 86th percentile for maximum on-field speed.
That weight adjustment's doing a lot of
that's
when
lifting. He's listed with the tackles.
Yeah, okay. And that's the thing is they did announce him as a tackle, but there have been speculations as to what position he might end up being best at, which we'll talk about a little bit later.
Right. And then as a guard, there are 124 guards in the over that time in the Shrine Bowl and Senior Bowl combined. He's in 51st percentile for speed as a guard and 80th percentile for weight adjusted speed. And if you look at his maximum acceleration, as a tackle, he's in the 92nd percentile for maximum acceleration. And as a guard, he's in the 96th percentile. If you then look at weight adjusted, so basically adjusting for weight, he's number 2 all time among tackles in weight adjusted max acceleration. And he's, as a guard, he's like 98th percentile. I forget if he's maybe like 5th or 6th out of the group, or maybe higher as a guard. And for maximum deceleration, he has the best deceleration for all tackles at the Senior Bowl, both raw and weight adjusted. Mm-hmm. And if you include the guards, he's 4th best all time, 3rd best in weight adjusted deceleration.
Yeah.
So ability to stop and change direction quickly,
quite good, especially at his weight.
At the Senior Bowl, he was 345, I think, not 336.
Yeah, because like you mentioned, he was 345 at the Senior Bowl, it sounds like, and then 336 at the Combine, but he was 356 at NC State, or at least that's what they listed him at. So, he's definitely helping his movement numbers a little bit by losing some of that weight. But the fact that he's able to, stop and start so quickly at his size is definitely going to be important if he wants to stick at tackle, I think specifically. Because you watch him at NC State, and I do think that with those reps, like on tape, I'm watching him, I'm like, yeah, he's a guard. Like, he's really struggling to recover as a tackle, get back outside if he makes a false step inside, pick up blitzers coming from the outside and being able to get back out to them with them having like a full head start on him. He struggled with that at NC State. But if he's playing a little bit lighter, maybe that's not as big of a deal, and he's able to move a little bit better. Right. And so that's going to be the question.
He just threw that 20-pound backpack on the ground and then started running around and moving a lot better.
Yeah, although conversely, a lot of the best parts of his tape were as like moving guys in the run game. And so the question there is
and landing on top of them
and burying them. Yeah, like he's really good at planting and pancaking guys. But the question there is, would he be as good at that at 330 as he was at 356? Right. And so I guess you're going to have to sacrificing
some run game for some pass game.
Yeah, and so I think that's a valid question and something that is going to have to, I guess we'll see in training camp and preseason, because I think they're probably going to, they announced him as a tackle. They're probably going to start him at tackle. See, it's all this classic, like, let the guy fail at tackle first because tackle's more valuable. And then if he does, move him into guard. So I think that's probably what they're going to do there. And we'll talk about that tackle guard room in a little bit. But just to kind of wrap up with the movement stuff, I mean, really good mover for his size and just in general at both tackle and guard at the Senior Bowl, like with the on-field stuff. And then Player Profiler had him as a 66th percentile speed score and a 61st first percentile burst score. So, he's quite a good athlete is kind of what it comes down to. Looking at, over to his agilities, which I think are always very important for offensive linemen, I think it's fair to say that they were okay, not great, but definitely, have to keep in mind the fact that he's also doing all of this at 330. And so these percentiles are compared against guys he's probably 20, 30 pounds heavier than. But he was around
300 or 290 pound linemen making up a lot of those testing numbers.
Yeah. And he was above average in the short shuttle, around 60th percentile, both as a tackle and as a guard. And then around average at the three cone as well, with around 49th percentile as a tackle, 56th percentile as a guard. So I would say, like, I don't feel any real concern about those agilities. They're not elite by any stretch of the imagination, but for him to still hit like reasonable numbers at that size is still pretty good, right?
Yeah, when you think about, I didn't do a weight adjusted for the agilities, but he's doing well enough at being a larger offensive lineman. So I think he's going to be good enough, and he's got reasonable reach with his wingspan as well, which will probably also add to his ability to get to markers for blocking.
Yep. And the explosion wasn't amazing, like the jumps weren't great. 29.5-inch vert was above average, 67th percentile as a tackle, a little bit better than that at guard. And then 8'11" broad is 70th percentile both at tackle and guard, or closer to 80th percentile guard. But again, doing it at a really big size is pretty good. And then in terms of injury history at the position, last 3 years he's played 13, 12 games, so he's been pretty durable. But Dad, in terms of kind of wrapping up the athletic profile, who were some of his most closely compared players there?
Yeah, so this is a real mixed bag. So I looked at both RAS and Mock Draftable. They both had Jermese Jones, who was a UDFA in 2002 and had a career in the CFL. So that's not quite what we're looking for here. Another one is Kareem McKenzie, who was a 2001 third-round pick, 10-year starter for the Giants and Jets. On Mock Draftable, Evan Neal, just a 2022 7th overall pick. Started 27 games for the Giants so far, but they did not pick up his fifth-year option.
Yeah, who has not been very good for the Giants, like, if we're being honest. Like, he was a bit of a bust so far.
But for the same draft, Landon Dickerson for the Eagles.
Yep, who's been quite good at guard.
Has already been a 3-time Pro Bowler and was in second round, 37th overall pick.
Yeah, so
we got some good, got some not so good. It's a little bit of a mixed bag.
Yeah,
for the closest comps athletically.
Yeah, and so athletically, I think there's definitely some promise there, especially at his size, especially when you look at some of the on-field. I think the thing that excites me most about his athletic profile is the on-field measurables at the Senior Bowl for his size. I think that's probably the highlight of his athletic profile. I think that's because his RAS is average. I think we didn't get a chance to mention that, but he had a 7.83 relative athletic score at tackle and an 8.84 at guard, which are both good, but they're not super standout. But I think when you look at the on-field measurable stuff, that's, I think, where the highlight of his athleticism comes out. And I think, we'll talk about a little bit, but I think his play at the Senior Bowl was really what drew the eye of a lot of coaching staffs and probably a big part of the reason why he had 14 different visits with teams. But, his play at NC State was also pretty solid. Dad, do you want to start touching on maybe his production there in that time?
Right. So I pulled out a few numbers, mostly from PFF. Their score for pass block efficiency had a grade of 98.2 in 2024. This grade would be in the 83rd percentile as an offensive tackle, where he basically lined up a left tackle. I don't think it translates between players who played tackle and players who played in the interior, because those pass block efficiency grade, kind of the scale within, gives you very different percentiles. So I think we kind of, in terms of his efficiency, we have to stick with the percentile within the tackle group, since that's where he played. Previous years in 2023 and 2022, he had efficiency ratings of 97.4, 98, which are in the 62nd and 79th percentiles. I should say that these percentiles are for single seasons from 2020 to 2024 in the NCAA, FBS and FCS. I think we've got both of them in there. So I basically just got all that data and then figured out where these efficiency grades would rank. When you want to think about, not the just efficiency score, but his pressure rate, he gave up pressures in 2024 at a 2.7% rate, which was in the 87th percentile for fewest pressures in those years. And then he gave up 3 sacks for a 0.6% sack rate per pass block rate. And that was in the 49th percentile for preventing sacks. So not quite as good as he was at preventing pressures. It was better in 2023 in the 69th percentile. The difference is he gave up 2 sacks versus 3 sacks. So there's going to be a lot of noise here when you have like 1 sack difference making such a difference in the percentile overall here for the sack rate given up. His pass blocking grade overall for PFF was 87.3 in 2024. It's his best year by far. 71.5 in 2023 and 81.2 in 2022. And then 2021 is a very small sample size, so not really significant.
Yeah, but his best year was certainly this past year in terms of pass protection, at least.
Yes, and also run blocking. I think he's basically showing improvement and getting better and better as his college time went on. His run blocking grades from PFF were in 2024 69.4. Previously, it was 62.6 and 56.4.
Yeah, and honestly, like I know that his pass blocking grades were better per PFF than his run blocking grades, but in terms of the games that I watched, which I think it was the Clemson game, the Tennessee game, and the North Carolina game, I felt like he impressed me more as a run blocker in terms of moving guys, and they've talked about him, as a people mover at that size, and like we mentioned, maybe. At a lighter weight, that it flips a little bit. We don't really know because at the combine he was 20 pounds lighter than he was listed at NC State, so we don't even really know what he was playing at. That because like the listed measurements that these colleges put out can be totally fabrications.
Who knows?
Who knows?
That might have been listed when he got there as his first year, and then they never changed it.
Exactly.
For all we know, he was another 20 pounds heavier.
Exactly. Like there's just no way of knowing. But at the same time, I do think that the big flaw in his production profile is the penalties. And I think that's probably what we need to focus on next, because he did struggle with penalties during his time at NC State. And I think part of that's just like his struggle to recover at times as a tackle. Do you want to touch on, those penalties? Because, he had 8 penalties each of the last 3 years. Like that's,
each year, yeah. So I looked at this is the thing that I saw the profile. So I better check actually what this means. So he had 8 penalties all 3 years. He was a starter at NC State. Among offensive tackle seasons, with at least 200 snaps from 2020 to 2024 for, avoiding penalties, he was in the 11th percentile in 2024, 21st percentile in 2023, and 6th percentile in 2022.
And those are the bad. Those are the bad.
Those are the bottoms.
Like that's a lot.
Bottom 13,
he's having
bottom 11,
a lot
bottom
of penalties.
21, bottom
He's
6.
having more penalties than like 90% of other tackles
At a higher rate than 94 in 2022, he had a higher penalty rate than 94% of the tackles.
Yeah, it's not just that he's playing a lot of snaps and accruing some penalties. Like he's averaging almost a penalty a game. Like that's like not tenable. Like you can't have that. And so, maybe like we mentioned, the weight thing, playing at a lighter weight, having slightly quicker feet, being able to get outside a little bit faster. Maybe that'll keep him from having to grab on for dear life in certain situations. But that's
less bending over and reaching.
Yeah, but that's just projection. And it's something where we've talked about. I really was impressed with him at the Senior Bowl in terms of his 1v1s. Kind of moving on to that side of the production thing. I thought that in the subset of the 1v1s that I watched, because we did a Senior Bowl episode if you want to go listen to it, I watched I think 150 reps of 1v1s from the Senior Bowl, all the ones I could get my hands on. And of the players that I got to see at least 4 or 5 reps of, I had him with the best win rate of that group. He won like 87.5%. And it's a small sample size for each player. It's only about like 10 reps each player.
That sounds like it must have been 7 out of 8.
Yeah, I think he won 7 out of 8. And so, and he was getting wins at both tackle and at guard. He was going against very solid players. He went against Donovan Ezeraku and beat him twice. And that was a guy who was a top 50 pick and was projected to be a first-round pick. Landon Jackson, who was a top 100 pick and who has a lot of power, and he just dealt with that power no problem. I think he also had a win against Mike Green, who was, a guy who was projected to be, a top 15, top 20 pick and went later because of off-the-field concerns. But in terms of on-field football talent, is a talented edge rusher. And so I was really impressed with his work at the Senior Bowl. And it sounds like the Packers were as well, because, they mentioned that they were essentially looking at him. They were looking at him at the Senior Bowl, and John Eric Sullivan, who is the VP of Player Personnel, I believe it is, specifically mentioned that, he showed really good twitch at the Senior Bowl at that lighter weight than he was at least listed at NC State. That lighter weight part was something I added, not something John Eric Sullivan mentioned. And then Brian Gutekunst mentioned as well that he thought, he really shined at the Senior Bowl. That was like brought up by both of them, in terms of when they were talking about Belton. So I think that's probably where he really, made a name for himself as a prospect, as a riser in this process. And like I mentioned, I just thought he looked really good in the 1v1s. That was part of the reason why I was fine with the pick, where they picked him, even if it was ahead of where it was in the consensus scores. In terms of what scouts thought about him, anything else you wanted to touch on the production side?
Oh, I just to say that also when I first started getting interested in him as a prospect for the Packers was after watching the
Senior Bowl 1v1s.
The Senior Bowl 1v1s.
Yeah. He was good at the Senior Bowl. In terms of what scouts had to say about him, Dane Brugler had him as his 9th offensive tackle with a 3rd to 4th round grade. This is what he had to say about him. Quote, a 3-year starter at NC State, Belton lined up at left tackle in former offensive coordinator Robert Anai's zone blocking scheme. After 2 years at Georgia Military College, he transferred to the Wolfpack and entrenched himself as the starting left tackle the past 3 seasons. Because of his size, you don't need to know his jersey number to spot him on film. He received the nickname Escalade inside the NC State program because of the way he can move at his best on inside zone runs. He can get in the way as a blocker and control rushers if his hands are right. Big if. That's something he added there. Overall, Belton uses his size and length to keep the game on his terms, staying centered and forcing defenders to try to go through him. When he is unable to do that, his body control and footwork break down quickly, which needs to be further addressed by NFL coaching. With improved consistency, he has the tools to get on the field and contribute, end quote. And so that's kind of something that is a bit of a, common theme throughout these scouting things, is that he just needs to be more consistent. And that's something that, you hope with the Packers, having a decent track record of developing offensive linemen, that they'd be able to help with that. Lance Zierlein of NFL.com had this to say about him. Quote, Belton is an enormous tackle with good power and long arms. He can bulldoze the roads clean for running backs, but needs to play with better hand placements to sustain his early lead. Belton has the length to shove rushers up and around the pocket, but his punch timing is inconsistent, and he lacks the body control to consistently respond to inside counters. If a team can steady his feet and improve his hand placement, he could become a solid starter at right tackle, but he will need some help from time to time, end quote. And then Daniel Jeremiah had him as his 118th overall player. So most of the scouts had him a little bit lower than where the Packers took him, but it seems like the league was maybe a little bit higher on him, just given, the number of visits that he had. But that's what the scouts had to say about him. What the Packers had to say about him specifically, and this is a quote from John Eric Sullivan's presser. I got this from Packers Wire as well, so shout out to them. Quote, I think he's very versatile. I think he can play left tackle. I think he can play both guard spots. I think he can play right tackle. That's one of the things that attracted us to him. Big man, versatility across the line of scrimmage, end quote. And so it seems like, the Packers were high on him. They think he can play a lot of spots. I think he's more of a guard if he plays like he did at NC State. Now, I think we got to see in training camp what he looks like at this lower weight. But I am excited about him as a guard. Like, I think the prospect of a line of Aaron Banks, Elton Jenkins, and Anthony Belton along the interior excites me. It excites me a lot. And so that's kind of what I have to say about him overall. But Dad, what are your closing thoughts on Belton as we, wrap up this? Any thoughts on what those scouts had to say? Any thoughts on what the Packers had to say? What are your final thoughts on Belton as a prospect after you've kind of looked at his production, looked at his athletic profile, watched a few games of him? What do you think about him?
Yeah, so some of the things we've touched on already, I was going to say, maybe that the weight he lost for the Senior Bowl and Combine will improve his mobility and reduce his penalties, because he seemed to be moving better there, the one-on-ones that he was in the game tape. But watching his game tape, you definitely see a player that likes to finish his blocking assignments and take guys all the way to the ground. Push them out of the play and the run plays, and then just push them down and play, and then land on top of them. He likes pancaking. He likes to finish his assignments. He likes to play all the way to the end of the play.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fun watch sometimes to watch him just bury guys, along the line. Like I said, I think he can play tackle in a pinch, but I really do think he is more of a guard. Just looking at his strengths in terms of his ability to anchor versus power, his ability to move people, decent mirroring ability inside, but not necessarily the speed to recover. Looking at that as kind of a weakness, I think that would maybe be a bit of a red flag as a tackle, unless, we've said it a million times, but unless he's moving better at that lower weight and he stays at that lower weight. And I did say, I do feel like he looked more mobile at Mobile. That is a pun intended. Mobile, Alabama is where the Senior Bowl is. But yeah, so I'm excited about this pick just to kind of, wrap things up. I think that interior of those 3 big guys would be really fun to watch and some really road grading stuff. And would definitely help with, I think, an area that the Packers have kind of struggled with the past few years, which is short area runs. I mean, we've been terrible in short yardage, 3rd and 1, 3rd and goal, down in the red zone. We've been bad at that for what feels like 3 years now.
I was going to say 5.
Yeah. And so it's even with the addition of Josh Jacobs, who you thought would help, they brought in AJ Dillon to, help with that. That didn't end up working, no. I think they're finally like, hey, we're just going to put 320, 330 pound guys in the interior and just hope that fixes this. And I do think that an interior of those three guys would, at least be a step in the right direction there.
Yeah, I think the idea is like, well, if we can get a little bit of blocking for Jacobs, just imagine how much you can do when he was having to do all the work himself last year.
Yeah. Yeah, because it was pretty much just like, hey, can you make five guys miss and get 10 yards here?
His yards after contact were elite last year.
Yeah, and don't let anyone tell you that it was because he wasn't going through the right holes. No, the yards after, he was getting hit in the backfield like half the time. Any last things you want to say on Belton, Dad, or should we move over to the other offensive lineman the Packers took, John Williams? Not to be confused with the composer. John Williams. All right, John Williams, seventh-round pick.
Making some beautiful music on the football field?
Well, let's hope. Seventh-round pick 250 for the Packers out of Cincinnati. 23 years old, born in 2002. Spent 5 years at Cincinnati. Over his career, had 1,756 snaps at left tackle and 64 at right tackle with none along the interior. So pretty much just a left tackle, just like Belton. And so he was a 2-year starter there as opposed to Belton, who's a 3-year starter. But it's kind of one of those things where a lot of teams will tell you this. Is like a lot of teams just put like, hey, you're our best lineman, you're going to play left tackle, or you're our best lineman, you're going to play center. And so those are usually where the two best linemen end up getting put. We talked about, Zach Tom and Elton Jenkins. Like they played center in college because they were the best linemen on their team. Like, and Tom also played a little left tackle in college because he was the best lineman on his team at, I think it was Wake Forest, right? But so he played left tackle for Cincinnati. Dad, what was your thought when, you saw this pick announced? I mean, it's hard to have a massive initial reaction to a 7th-round pick, but what was your thought?
Yeah, we were there. You're there. I was like, this was the pick I predicted before it actually happened. It's like, okay, where do they go here? I'm going with Williams.
Yeah, you were right. You got that one exactly right.
I expected the Packers to take another offensive lineman in the draft. I thought they'd get at least 2. And he seemed like the best one that was left at that point to me. And I thought he had a lot of good traits. A little bit of tape I'd looked at that point that looked promising. And yeah, so that was by far I thought the best fit left in the draft by the time the Packers were coming up. Yeah. So I was happy with that pick. He's a guy I had been picking a lot at the end of the draft process in my mocks in the 7th round. Yeah,
and I just am happy they're taking more offensive line depth because I just think that, that Eagles game showed that it's not up to snuff. You just really did not get much from either the two guys that you took last year in Glover and Monk last year. Monk could not get on the field and was barely active on game days. And Glover, in really the only stint that we saw him, was just not good. I mean, it's nothing on him necessarily. I think that was more on the coaching staff putting him in a bad situation, but he wasn't good. And so it is what it is. And then you also didn't retain Andre Dillard, who actually just today signed with the Niners. So you're not going to be able to get Dillard back. And so they need more offensive line depth. And so I have no problem with taking some swings here in the late rounds. We have a recent history of having, a good offensive tackle picked in the 7th round with Rasheed Walker. So hopefully they can duplicate that. Wouldn't hate it at all. But yeah, so let's start talking a little bit about him as an athlete. Dad, what is his physical profile looking like in terms of what he's looking like coming out of Cincinnati? He's bigger than I realized, like heavier than I realized.
Yeah, not tall for a tackle, that is. For a normal human, he's enormous. His RAS at offensive tackle is 7.63. And then as a guard, 9.06. So elite as a guard, good as a tackle. Athleticism as measured by RAS. His size from his some of the measurements from his pro day, some from the combine. 6'4" and 1/8 and 322 pounds. He's got some real density. Only as a tackle, he's only 13th percentile for height, but 73 percentile for weight, and as a guard, 58th percentile for height and 76th percentile for guard.
Yeah, and that is something I do want to mention that I forgot to mention here at the top is when they picked him, he was announced as a guard by Green Bay. So that is just something to keep in mind. They announced Belton at tackle, but they announced Williams, even though he's only really taken snaps at left tackle, they announced him as a guard. So
yeah, and you had thoughts about his weight as well.
Yeah, I watch him and I was very surprised to see him weigh in at 322. Because I watched him, I'm like, oh yeah, he's probably like 310. Like he's kind of like a little bit finesse game. He doesn't really drive people off the ball. But he's 322. So that's about in line with the weight that they have these other guards at. For reference, Aaron Banks is 325, but he's like a whole inch taller. So like mass wise, like density wise, he's even denser than Aaron Banks. So he fits like the new kind of look of what they want their guards to look like. Now, I don't know if he fits the play style of what they want their guards to look like in terms of being people movers, but we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah, and so even though they've listed him as a guard, his arms are long enough for tackle, if measured at 34 and a half inches, and like I think one of the locations, maybe the pro day, which is 67th percentile for tackle, so it's not short. And actually, Packers have a lot of tackles with shorter arms, and Pro Bowl tackles don't necessarily have the longest arms either. All pro. I haven't actually looked at Pro Bowl. All pro tackles. And his arm length is 89th percentile for guard. His 11-inch hands, one of the largest hands at the combine this year. So like trash can lids. 95th percentile at tackle and 97th percentile at guard for hand size. And a wingspan of 82 and a quarter is just a little bit above average for a tackle, 56%, but big for a guard, 93rd percentile for a guard, that wingspan.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's funny because like they announced Belton at tackle, and I feel like he's more of a guard. And then they announced Williams at guard, and I'm like, I feel like he's more of a tackle. But hey, I guess we'll see. That's what training camp's for. I'm
a little surprised they didn't just come out and say, well, we'll try him out at tackle and see how he does.
Yeah, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. But in terms of how his speed looks, how does he look from speed, explosion, athleticism, agilities type?
Right. So he's a little faster than Belton. His 40 time is 5.17. Which is 69th percentile as a tackle, and
around 70th percentile for both.
70th,
a little bit better as a guard, but
a little, and similar percentiles for the 20-yard split, 69th percentile for tackle, 75th percentile a guard. The 10-yard split is not as high; it's only a little bit below average for a guard, actually, 42 percentile, and just basically average for a guard.
Yeah, so that initial kind of pop off the line is maybe not
out of
quite,
the blocks.
Yeah,
maybe need to train jumping out of the blocks a little bit more.
Yeah, but his top speed is pretty good. So I don't know.
Yeah,
so I guess we'll see.
Yeah, and so to delve into his speed as well, since he was at the Shrine Bowl, we do have some of that Zebra Tech measurement from him as well.
And I thought he looked pretty good in the there just were not a lot of 1v1 Shrine Bowl reps I could find. I found 3 or 4 of his. Yeah, okay, you found 6. I thought he did pretty well though at the Shrine Bowl, all things considered.
Yeah, I think I had him. If you're gonna just mention that, I had him winning like 4 of those 6.
Yeah, not bad. Take those.
Just one to kind of you might quibble with, but his on-field speed. So as a tackle, which again 128 players, Shrine Bowl and Senior Bowl combined. His max speed isn't. So this is funny. His max speed isn't great. It's 19th percentile as a tackle, but 50th percentile as a guard. And then his weight adjusted maximum speed is 25th percentile as tackle and 22nd percentile as a guard. His max acceleration looks a little bit better. 69th percentile as a tackle and 64th percentile as a guard. And when you do the weight adjustments, as he's a little bit on the heavier side, he comes out as 71st percentile.
Which is funny
as a tackle and 75th percentile.
Yeah, it's funny because it's the opposite of his 40.
With the 40 sprint
doesn't make sense, but whatever. I'd rather him be faster on the field than in the 40s. So we'll take it, I guess.
Yeah, and so his maximum deceleration, ability to stop on a dime, as it were, or stop on a quarter, or stop on a dollar bill. Perhaps for some of these bigger guys,
maybe like a quarter. Yeah, we'll give him a quarter, not a dime, but we'll give him a quarter.
He's a little bit above average. As a tackle, 59th percentile, 69th percentile weight adjusted, and as a guard, 54th percentile, 60th percentile weight adjusted. So his ability to stop and start is kind of a little bit above average.
He's an above average mover even for his size. He's not an elite mover, but an above average mover, and you wouldn't expect him to be an elite mover, drafting him in the 7th round.
But still a pretty good mover, to be 322 and moving decently.
Yeah. That's true, because those percentiles are
draftable.
Some of them are,
some of them are weight adjusted, but not all of them.
Yeah, and on player profile, he has a 73rd percentile speed score. he's a good athlete. They had him as a 114.7 athleticism score, which was 101st out of 850 offensive linemen. Yeah. So that's good.
Agilities slightly better than Belton's what they had at Player Profiler.
Yeah, agilities were average to below average. Just a 52nd percentile short shuttle, which is a little bit better at guard, more like 60th at guard, but still like just above average. And then the 3-cone wasn't great, just 31st percentile, 33rd for guards. So yeah,
this question is,
and the short shuttle is
offensive linemen
more
important. I care more about short shuttle.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know,
defensive linemen, I care more about
3-cone. Yeah, so the short shuttle is kind of like shuffling side to side mostly, and so that's more of an offensive line type movement, whereas the 3-cone is a lot of sharp turns, running at full speed. And so I like the 3-cone more for pass rushers and for receivers,
linebackers,
and corners as well, where you need to be turning a lot, or turning a corner sharply. Like that's where it matters more. Whereas short shuttle for linemen, a lot of that is like you are going to need to be moving side to side very quickly.
You want to shuffle. You don't want to cross your feet.
Yeah, exactly. So the short shuttle being better than the 3-cone, the 3-cone's not as big a deal. I mean, obviously you'd like that to be better as well, but the short shuttle is pretty good. So, there's that. Didn't do any of the jumps, so we don't have anything there. In terms of injury history, played 12 games with over 800 snaps each of the last 2 years, so it was pretty sturdy there. Dad, what were his top comps athletically?
Yeah, so here we got, I think, a little bit of a mixed bag. Well, the first one I should mention on RAS is TJ Lang.
Yeah, I wouldn't hate it.
Longtime Packer tackle converted to guard.
Yeah, and I mean, very good guard for.
He was a fourth rounder.
For a long time. Yeah.
Had some other guys who basically ended up playing guard. Carl Nix, 2008 fifth round pick, had a 6-year career, made 2 All-Pro teams at guard.
Mm-hmm.
John Simpson, 2020 fourth round pick of the Raiders, who's started for
he's been in the league
the Raiders,
for a minute now.
Baltimore, and the Giants. And also at guard. I didn't look to see if all those guys were college tackles. On mock draftable, Robert Hunt, who was a second round pick in 2020,
just
5-year starter,
and just got a massive contract last year from Carolina.
Yep.
So
just made a Pro Bowl last year. Spencer Long, a 2014 third rounder. He started 44 of 67 games over 6 years. And another player this year, Emory Jones from LSU, was a third round pick.
Yeah. So
mostly, I would say mostly success stories.
Yeah. So I mean, if you pick a 7th rounder, like even if he's in the league for 5 years, like I would say that's a success for a 7th rounder for the most part. Like,
even if you just look at where these his top comps were drafted, a 5th rounder, a 4th rounder, another 4th rounder, 2nd rounder,
mm-hmm.
3rd rounder, 3rd rounder. So
yeah,
we were talking about that steal concept earlier.
Yeah, and he was a guy that I think. There was varying reviews on him, but Dad, in terms of we have an idea, who he is as an athlete, above average athlete at guard, pretty good mover for his size. He's heavier than you'd realize, 320 pounds, like we mentioned, has long enough arms for tackle. How did that translate to his play while he was at Cincinnati? What did he look like as a player out there?
Right. So again, looking at some PFF metrics as well as his pressure rate. So this pass block efficiency that we talked about before over the last 5 years. He had a 99 grade, which was a 96.5 percentile amongst all tackles. So better than what Belton had. He is 8 in terms of interior offensive lineman. Well, it's also hard to.
I don't think it really translates. I don't think it's fair to compare those
because
two,
I think it seems like the pass blocking efficiency is easier when you're inside.
Yeah,
and because he wasn't playing a mix of positions, he's only on the outside.
Yeah, you can skip that. I don't think that's fair.
Let's forget that. In 2023, his pass blocking efficiency was 98, which is a 79th percentile among those 5 seasons. He gave up pressures at only a 1.7% rate, which was the 96th percentile for seasons since in 2020 to 2024. And he only in 2024 he only gave up 1 sack, a 0.2% sack per pass block rate, which was the 81st percentile for lowest best sack rate.
Yeah.
And in 2023, where he gave up 2 sacks, it was the 63rd percentile.
And 3 sacks over 2 years, we get sacks aren't everything. Pressure rate matters too, but 3 sacks over 2 years, not bad.
Yeah,
not bad
out of over 1,600 snaps.
Yeah,
so that's really good. His pass blocking grade overall from PFF is 86.3 in 2024. So also kind of elite, borderline elite. 75.4 in 2023. And then 2022, 21, and 20 were all very small sample sizes.
Yeah, he's really just a 2-year
I don't think the grades have any meaning.
Yeah.
But he's improved in 2024 compared to 2023. And again, his pass blocking grade is better than his run blocking grade. Mid 60s each of the last 2 years in his run blocking grade, compared to his 86%, 86.3 this year for pass blocking.
Yeah, he's definitely a better pass blocker than run blocker, but he also did, the penalties were not as big a problem with him as they were with, Belton, which is definitely something Belton's going to clean up and, definitely has the possibility to clean up, but it doesn't seem like it's as big a problem with Williams, right?
Yeah, in avoiding penalties, he was in the 80th percentile, so the good side.
Yeah, that's
only 20% of the offensive tackles had avoided penalties. He only had 2 penalties in 2024. 4 in 2023 would still put him in the 54th percentile. So still just, kind of right about average.
Yeah. And the thing with Williams, and so let's move on to the scout quotes, is I was impressed with him as a pass blocker in terms of his movements and pass sets. And I just think that, and it's weird because it's I feel like they announced him at guard. I feel like he's better at tackle because I don't see him as a people mover. And that kind of, is paralleled a bit by what some of the scouts had to say about him. Dane Brugler, for instance, had him as his offensive tackle 25, and he had him as a free agent grade in UDFA, which when you're picking at 250, it's pretty much the same thing. But quote, a 2-year starter at Cincinnati, Williams was a steady presence at left tackle in offensive coordinator Brad Glenn's zone-based run scheme with some gap methods. He waited his turn as a reserve over his first few years on campus, but was ready for the starting job the past 2 seasons. He allowed just 3 combined sacks. At his best in pass protection, Williams quickly gets out of his stance to close space, stay balanced in his mirror, and absorb fend with his hands. He shows functional mobility and body control in the run game to seal the lane, but he isn't a mauler, physically or mentally, and likely never will be. Overall, Williams has the footwork and pass blocking instincts that will play well at the next level, but the main concern is about his ability to halt and move NFL defensive linemen. Some of his skills work best at tackle, others at guard, and he might be caught in the middle, end quote. So, fair. And then Lance Zierlein of NFL.com had to say, quote, Williams, a college tackle, has the body type of a guard, which is where he might be asked to move as a pro. He's tight-hipped, leading to waist bending, but he has adequate quickness in the early stages of the block. He lacks decisiveness and body control to make consistent use of early advantages. He also needs to get stronger and more aggressive as a run blocker. He's long in pass pro with adequate footwork and when projected to guard, but it remains to be seen if he can survive against pro bull rushers, end quote. And so that's kind of the thing, is he's 325 and he does not really play like it. He does not play like a 322 rather, but he doesn't play like he's 320 pounds. He plays like he's closer to 305.
I'm sure these guys, in the morning they might be 322.
That's true.
And right after dinner time, they could be 6 pounds heavier.
Exactly.
The amount these guys have to eat.
And, I mean, when you look at what these guys their diets look like, just to there's
it's 10,000 calories or something crazy.
I mean, it's one thing to gain the weight; it's another to keep it on. It's all I mean, it's tough. And, just to, kind of keep an eye on what Cincinnati was listing him at, they were listing him at 320. So they listed him at about what he weighed in at, at the Pro Day Combine or whichever one it was. In terms of what the Packers have to say about him, Brian Gutekunst, this is again via Packers Wire, they had a nice little collection of quotes. Quote, he's got great length, exceptionally bright, really, really, really smart. He's got the versatility to play left tackle and guard. He probably could play center because he's smart enough to. He's one of the few guys who can really play with full extension with his hands and is moving his feet at the same time. So that's kind of what they had to say about him. They like his versatility. Sorry, you wanted to add something?
I just say, and when they say smart, they mean he's a rocket scientist.
Yeah,
he was majored in aerospace engineering.
Yeah, smart guy. Yeah, so there's that. But Dad, just kind of wrapping things up here, what were your final thoughts on Williams? Because I mean, like I said, I just don't, and I think the point Brugler made about him maybe being caught in the middle between tackle and guard, where it's I think he could stick at tackle. But the question is just, can he handle the power? Because he plays like a finesse guy, he does not maul guys, and that's why I'm a little surprised they announced him as a guard, because he does not fit the archetype of the guys they want at guard, despite him being the size of the guards they've been adding. He does not really move people. I do think, though, that he did a pretty good job. What he did do well in the run game was I thought he got to the second level quite well. I did think he got up on linebackers quicker than they thought he was going to. And when he was able to once he was able to get his hands on them, he did a good job there. And he was able to get to the second level well. I just don't know that that's necessarily that. I don't think that's going to cover up all of the facets of what they want from their guards in the run game in terms of being better people movers. But I guess we'll see. I really do think he's a better tackle just because I think he's really good at getting out of his stance at like and mirroring guys. And like I think he's a good mover for like. I don't see any reason why you need to move him to guard. Like he's a little short. That's the thing. But his arms are long enough, so it's like I don't know.
Yeah, that's the thing that I think is, in terms of a 7th round pick, the upside is really high and definitely worth using a pick for to get him into your camp.
I don't even know if I would say really high. I mean, I think the upside is the upside is like 20th best starting tackle in the league. But that's good upside
for a 7th rounder. That's really high.
But I wouldn't say that's like crazy upside. It's not like you're drafting. Well, I would say like Josh Nijman is like the example of a 7th round pick where it's like the upside is crazy. Like this guy's huge. He's a freak athlete. Stuff like that.
He's not as freak an athlete.
He's not, because that's the thing is like that's why I hesitate to say the upside is amazing because his athleticism is just average.
Nijman's athleticism was 9.8 as a tackle, and he was an UDFA.
That's what I'm saying. Is like that's why I don't think it's fair to say his like ceiling is crazy because he's just not an elite athlete. But I think for a 7th round pick, his ceiling is quite good.
Yeah, does he have the same ceiling as Walker?
Yeah, exactly.
Quite possibly,
Walker's
right?
the thing is Walker's way bigger, like much bigger than him.
No.
Isn't he taller? Isn't he a lot taller?
He's taller. He is an inch and a half taller, but he's 10 pounds lighter.
But I was going to say, but he's a lot taller. He's more traditional tackle size.
Yes, but their arms are
similar. In fact, I think
Williams are longer.
Williams is longer. Yeah, exactly.
Williams' arms are longer. He's not as tall. But this is the thing. The Packers have worked with shorter tackles. Zach Tom is 6'4" and a quarter. He's an eighth of an inch taller. Same with Bakhtiari, an eighth of an inch taller.
Weird.
So I think that's why they talk about body type is most of the people are assessing like, well, he's too short really to be a tackle.
But the arm length is fine, which is like, that's why it's weird to me. But, and that's why it's weird they announced him as a guard because I just don't see him as a guard. But anyway, what were your final thoughts on him?
Well, so yeah, I felt like he mostly held his own in the one-on-ones in the Shrine Bowl, though he did get beat on like a spin move one time where he didn't react quickly enough to it or someone beat him aside. But I'm a little surprised that they didn't say, okay, this guy's going to start a tackle and we'll see what happens.
Yeah,
I think his probably most likely scenario as a success story would be if he becomes kind of a swing player all across the line.
Yeah,
fill in a tackle or guard.
And that's what, Brian Goodikins kind of mentioned is that he has versatility. And he mentioned them for both these guys. And honestly, I don't know if I've ever seen an offensive line pick that they've made where he hasn't said they can play multiple positions. Like, can you remember any offensive lineman they've drafted where he's like, no, he's just this? Like, I don't think I've ever heard him say that.
Did you ever say it was like just a center?
No, even Jacob Monk, he was like, yeah, he can play left guard, he can play center, he can play right guard. I don't think he actually mentioned tackle for that one. It's like the only one he's probably never mentioned tackle for. But like, we think he can play all three interior spots. Like, it's like,
yeah,
okay.
It's funny in these two cases where he's like singing the praises of their versatility. It's like both these guys were like left tackle, set it, forget it.
Yeah,
nothing.
Exactly. Well,
they did try him out, I think, a little bit at the Senior Bowl and Shrine Bowl, lining up against.
Yeah,
D tackles and on the inside as well as on the outside.
And Belton at the Senior Bowl played some guard as well, so it's like they did some at the All-Star games, but yeah, I just don't think like I wanted to mention like he thinks they can be versatile. It's like he says that about every single offensive lineman, so it's like we'll see what the coaching staff does with them. Is I guess more of a thing.
You just get to the podium and hit play.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, do you want to start? I just wanted to end this kind of podcast with a little bit on the offensive line room as a whole. I copied and pasted our offensive line depth chart so you know what it looks like. But I just wanted to ping this off of you. So assuming health, starting today, I think 3 spots are locks. Left guard, Aaron Banks, you paid him enough, like he's going to be a starter. Elton Jenkins, center. He's really the only real center on the roster. Zach Tom, right tackle. Those 3 spots seem to be set in stone, right? That feels reasonable.
Yeah. I mean, Jenkins and Tom were far and away their best offensive linemen last year. And both way better than Banks was last year too.
Yeah.
They're paying Banks to be a starter.
They paid to be a starter, so he's going to start. So assuming those 3 guys are taking those 3 spots, it's interesting because that kind of leaves 4 guys for 2 spots and 4 guys with some pedigree. So going down, you got Rasheed Walker, who started left tackle the last 2 seasons. He was your starting left tackle. He's pretty good there. So you have a known commodity there. Then you have Jordan Morgan, who was a first-round pick last season. I get that he was hurt last season and didn't win a job, but he was still your first-round pick last season. You got Sean Ryan, who was your starting right guard last season and was, I would say, an average right guard in the league.
3rd-round pick.
Average. Yeah, and he was a 3rd-round pick. And then you have Anthony Belton, who was a 2nd-round pick this season. And then both Rasheed Walker and Sean Ryan are projected to be free agents this coming offseason.
That, I think, that's where I see these picks.
But that's 4 guys for 2 spots. What do you think about that approach when all 4 of those guys have, they have reasonable arguments to be in that starting group, and you're going to end up with two decent offensive linemen riding the pine to start the season, assuming everyone is healthy, which obviously is a big if. But that's two guys not developing or two guys losing value. If I'm Rasheed Walker and I lose my starting spot, I'm demanding a trade. You already saw what happened to Yosh Nijman. He went from a guy who was probably going to be making $15 million a year to a guy who got a $5 million contract from Carolina because he wasn't a starter anymore. I'm just curious what happens. 4 guys for 2 spots, and all 4 of those guys have some amount of pedigree to them, right?
Yeah, I see. The way I saw these picks in the beginning is like, this to me says they're not planning on bringing back Walker or Ryan.
But what do you think it means for 2025? Because I think I agree. But what do you think it means for this year?
As they often do, they draft with an eye to a future year. I think they're just going to let them fight it out. It will be tough if Ryan and Walker both lose their starting jobs. But they also feel like we didn't have enough guys that we felt comfortable putting in games by the end of the year.
No, yeah, totally.
So having 2 guys on the bench who are legit starters, I'm sure that LaFleur and Gutekunst are saying, yeah, that's about right. We have 7 legit starters, and then plus some other guys.
Yeah, and I think it's a good approach from the team. Like, I don't have any problems with a crowded offensive line room is a good problem to have. That is not a bad thing in the grand scheme of things. But I do think it just leaves some difficult decisions. And if you had to guess, how would it shake out? Actually, let me get to that in a second. So we mentioned, 7 guys now. Last year, I think they kept 10 offensive linemen. I went back and counted. That leaves us with the 7 we already mentioned. So like the 3 guys locked in the spots, the 4 guys fighting for those other 2 spots. That leaves Monk and Glover, who were picks last year. Telfort, who was ahead of those guys in the depth chart last year. Donovan Jennings, who was a promising UDFA this past year. John Williams, who we just talked about, draft pick this year. And then every other UDFA depth player. I think they have like 17 offensive linemen on the roster right now.
Some crazy number, yeah.
For 3 spots. How do you think that shakes out?
I've just been starting to do my first round of making a 53-man roster. And I ended up with 10 offensive linemen. And I think Jennings, we didn't really get a chance to know what he was.
No, he was kind of hurt a little bit in camp.
In the preseason or some time early, so I didn't really get to see what he could do. Very athletic, and also a pretty big guy as well.
Yeah, I think he's like 320, right?
He 323.
I'll look it up. Okay, 323.
He's 6'4" and 1/8, and 323. It's almost the exact same size.
Yeah.
As Williams, and he was 9'6" RAS at guard and 8'9" at tackle. And so I think they like him. They guaranteed him a good amount of bonus to sign. My guess is the 3 guys who are going to make it are Monk, Williams, and Jennings.
Okay. If I had to guess, I would say Williams, Telfort, and Monk.
Yeah, I think Monk has, he's the center.
The thing is,
but he didn't play him last year.
They didn't want to play him when the center went down.
So who's the backup center then? Ryan?
Yeah, right.
I think it has to be Ryan.
It's probably Ryan, and
or Tom in break.
In this scenario, it would be. I don't think they would do that. But I think it would be Ryan would be your emergency backup center. And
let's say like Ryan and Jenkins are the 2 that go down.
It's a good point. It almost does.
And then
feel
it's
like
Tom moving in, and like Belton and Morgan and Walker in the starting lineup.
So they did have Monk on the team last year as their backup center, and then when push came to shove and Myers missed time, they went Elton there. And then when Elton went down and Myers went down in the playoff game, they brought Monk in to take practice snaps, and then we come back from commercial and Ryan's at center. No, he did not play a snap. We come back from commercial break and Ryan's at center. It's like, wasn't Monk just taking reps with Jordan Love during the commercial break? Like, what happened? It's like, no, that I guess those practice reps went terribly. Is kind of my takeaway there. I don't know what happened from point A to point B, but it did not go well. So I don't know what they think of Monk. I really don't. And I think Andy Herman and Justice Skater were talking about this on Pack Day. It was like, is he just like a relic of a different kind of running game where it's like they realize partway through the year, it's like, oh, we want to run more like Josh Jacobs-y run game stuff as opposed to what we'd run before. And Monk doesn't fit that. I don't know. So But
he's very athletic, though. He didn't do the agilities. But he had a 9.36 RAS as a guard and 9.74 as a center. He's a little lighter, 3.08. So he's not in the mold of the big interior offensive linemen they've seem to be collecting lately.
I mean, he's like, when you look at Elton and Myers, like they seem to want a big center. It's kind of like my takeaway there. So I guess we'll see. And then the final thing I wanted to ask you about is, what do you want the starting offensive line, assuming health, to look like this fall? And what do you think it's going to be this fall?
So if we want what I want, then the answer is I want Belton and Morgan to take the jobs.
I want them to win the jobs.
To win the jobs, because that means that they're better than what we had last year.
Exactly.
That's what I want.
What do you think is going to happen?
What I think is probably going to happen is Belton is not going to be ready.
Yeah.
As a rookie.
God, I hope Morgan is ready.
Then it's going to be Ryan, Morgan, and Walker
for 2 spots.
Battling for 2 spots. That's my guess. So they seem to want to have Morgan win the tackle job. They didn't really try him that much last year. Though.
I was going to say, do you sense a disconnect between the general management, like the front
GM
office?
saying, "Yeah, we want him to be try tackle," and like, how many practices and mini camps do they actually have him at tackle last year?
Well, I was going to say, do you sense a disconnect between the front office and the coaching staff? I was like, yeah, the front office wants him to get reps at tackle. I don't know if the coaching staff is, I guess we'll see. But yeah, I agree. We want Morgan to win that left tackle job because that would solve a lot of problems going forward. And we wouldn't have to have, issues with do you pay Rasheed Walker? Probably not, because he's going to make like $20 million. But where does that leave you at left tackle if like Morgan 2 years in a row can't beat him out at left tackle? Like, I don't know.
So if I had to actually make a guess, though, then I think the most likely scenario is Walker, Banks, Jenkins, Morgan, Tom.
Yes. I think that's the most likely scenario, like assuming, everyone's there. But I definitely hope that, Morgan and Belton are able to win those jobs. But
right, just because they're so amazing.
Yeah, let's just hope they play at like crazy all pro levels. Yeah, why not? Since we're in fairy tale,
we're talking about what we want.
Exactly. I'll take a pony. But anyway, that kind of does it for our deep dive into Belton, Williams, and the offensive line. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back with more deep dives going forward. I know I mentioned the combinations we're going to be doing next, but we'll see. We haven't fully decided which one we're going to do next.
So we told you what they're going to be, but
they could be going in any order.
We have the freedom to pull that rug
exactly
out you whenever we want.
But anyway, thank you again for listening. Check us out on Blue Sky at Father Son Packer. Like, subscribe, leave a review, leave a comment. We would really appreciate it. Tell a friend, whether that's Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. Check those out. We'll be doing deep dives going forward. We did a Matthew Golden one last week, so check that one out if you haven't already. And until next time, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.